Question is, what defines a high potential candidate? Well, maybe the question is, why do they matter? As in, who should care? And the answer is that the distribution of productive employees is not symmetrical. About 20% of the people in every organization account for about 80% of the productivity. It doesn't matter if it's sales, if it's car mechanics, if it's customer service reps. 20% of the people do 80% of the work, and 20% of the people cause 80% of the problems. So it really matters getting those issues right. So given that most thoughtful people think that correct management of high potential employees is the key to the future, is or should be a company's most important competitive advantage. There's a great, the high potential has been a hot topic in HR and human capital management circles for several years, but mostly it's just high. People have not addressed the issue in any kind of careful analytical or rigorous way. I did a very careful review of the literature on this about 6 months ago, and trying to put together a whole bunch of different sources on the topic. I think high potential, do you think about high potential in terms of 5 components? The first 3 components concern what I call basic employability. This is my not so subtle attack on the IQ business. If you ask a psychologist what the most important characteristic of another employee would be, they'll tell you it's IQ. It's simply not. I'm a lifetime critic of the IQ business. First thing is, can a person get a job and keep a job? That's called basic employability. And there are 3 components to basic employability. First is, the person has to be rewarding to deal with. You have to enjoy being around them. And that's just basic interpersonal skills. The second thing is, the person has to be able to learn the job, learn and perform the job. They have to be able to be smart enough to figure out what's going on in the job and do it. And typically, that's on-the-job training. Very, very few training programs are actually of any use. Mostly you learn how to do the job by doing it. So they need to be rewarding to deal with. They need to be able to learn and do the job. And the third, they have to be willing to do the job. As George Bush Sr. used to say, that 90% of life is just showing up. So are they rewarding to deal with? Are they able to do the job? And are they willing to do the job? That's basic employability. And that gets them in the door. That gets them employed and keeps them employed. Many very bright people are just unpleasant. They're egotistical, they're arrogant, they're abrasive, and so smarts won't do it. So basic employability is the building block. And then, so that's basic employability. Then high potential then builds on that. And the next thing you need is some desire for, talent for management. We just call that ambition. Do they want to be in charge? High potential refers to, does a person have potential to move to the top of the hierarchy in your organization? Ultimately, you think high potential might have to do, is it going to be a high potential welder or a high potential car mechanic or a high potential knit flicker? No, in the HR world, high potential refers to, do they have the talent to become senior management? And so they need to be employable, you need to be able to live with them, they do a good job, be a good employee, and then they need to want to get ahead, because there are a lot of very pleasant people who just would rather not be bothered with senior management. So it's being rewarding to deal with, able to do the job, willing to do the job, desiring status in the organization, and then finally, I think there's a lot to this whole concept of global mindset. That is, you could be a really talented, hardworking, ambitious hillbilly, and you're going to be stuck running a barbecue pit for the rest of your life. I mean, there really is something to global mindset, and that and the essence of that is being open-minded, tolerant, curious about other things, as opposed to being parochial, narrow-minded, and dogmatic. Most companies, virtually every company, fails in the process of identifying high potential for a very simple reason. They think there are 2 reasons actually. The first reason is they think they confuse doing a good job in your present position with the potential to do a good job in a position that has more expanded responsibilities. 90% of the people who are doing a good job in their current job will fail when they get promoted. So first mistake they make is confusing present performance with the potential for future performance. It's just, that's a big one. And then the second, and in my view, the big mistake is that it's just internal politics. There's a guy here, he looks at this guy here, he says, if he got promoted, that would be good for my career. I think he's high potential. So lots and lots of people get designated high potential because senior management has an agenda. I would say in many cases, I mean, so what, 70% of the cases people get designated as high potential for political reasons. Well, I mean, I think there's a 70-year-old literature on the question of how to choose people for jobs. And there are two answers. There's the popular answer and there's the right answer. The popular answer is somebody makes a decision based on their experience, their intuition, their perceptions about this person's potential. That is to say, they pull the decision right out of their ass. So that's called the clinical tradition in making decisions about people. The alternative to that is what we call the actuarial tradition, which is choosing people for jobs based on hard, statistically validated assessment results. Now, in the history of the world, 90% of the decisions get made for the wrong reasons, and maybe 10% of the decisions get made for the right reasons, namely statistical reasons. The data are perfectly clear on this. If you use validated assessments to make decisions about who to promote, who to hire, who to place, you'll do better. But inside most organizations, it's all politics all the time. Nobody really cares about maximizing the outcomes for the organization. They're mostly concerned about maximizing the outcomes for their own careers. Question is, should you tell high potentials that they're regarded as high potentials? And I think the answer is that you better tell them, otherwise they'll quit. They're going to be vain like everybody else. They're going to want to think they know. High potentials know they're outperforming. The real high potentials know that they're outperforming the other people, and they just wonder if anyone else is noticing. And that the key to the whole thing is letting them know, yeah, we know how good you are, and we appreciate what you're doing for us. So by all means, you need to tell them early on that we think you have a lot of talent for performance in this organization, or for advancement in this organization. So you get to be hypo of the day, star of tomorrow. What you do if they're not high potential is you say, look, work hard, do a good job, and you have a lot of employment here. And we'll do everything we can to help you with your career, but we don't see you as being in the line of progression to be the next CEO. So yeah, a lot of people just don't want the aggravation associated with senior management. Well, there are sort of, I would say, three big steps in the process of developing high potential. The first thing is try not to surround them with mediocre players. Try to put them in a cohort of talented players. That's important because talented people don't like hanging out with losers. Second, try not to force your high potentials to work for an incompetent boss. Now, since the base rate of incompetent management in corporate America is about 70%, you're going to have to be extremely self-conscious to avoid making these poor guys, these talented people, work for an incompetent boss. And then the third thing is the best single way to develop a high potential is to putting them in, because they're going to be managers, just to put them in a position where they have to manage people and then give them feedback on their performance as a manager. There's just no alternative to that. So just try to surround them with talented colleagues, try to set them up so they work for a talented boss, and give them experience managing people. Talented people can learn from their mistakes. Losers can't learn from their mistakes. You can look at someone and say they got a lot of potential for leadership, but you won't know if they have talent for it until they're actually on the job. It's just, that's it. You have the potential to do whatever, but until you've done it. But I'm a fan of the concept of potential. I mean, that's where you start. And then you test your hypotheses, and then you see how well you can do. The biggest single kind of a sub-factor in this whole business is something we call coaching, that the Hogan assessment systems calls coachability. People who have a lot of talent will only actualize their talent, will only realize or fulfill their talent if they're coachable, if they're willing to listen to feedback, if they're willing to learn from their mistakes, because they're going to make a lot of mistakes. On the one hand, there are a small number of well-defined and well-understood competencies that are absolutely essential for leadership. On the other hand, there's what every organization in the world has its own competency list. A camel is a horse that was designed by a committee. Competency models are designed by committees. So by definition, most competency models are idiosyncratic and crazy. They're put together they're political statements. They're about how do we want to think about ourselves in this organization. And they have no basis on the reality. In fact, you can't use organizations' competency models to evaluate their own managers because they don't work. How do you gauge the impact of a high potential development program? That is a really good question. The answer is I can't tell you just sitting here, but what I can tell you is no one ever asks that question. Training is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and no one ever inquires into the effectiveness or functionality or ROI of training programs. My wife and I could design a program to evaluate that, but I can tell you that we would have trouble selling it because nobody wants to know. You have in the world something called projects for promotion. Here I am, I'm the ambitious young man. I want to get ahead in this organization. I'm going to invent a project that'll get me promoted. And then once the project's put in place, they get promoted and they're gone and nobody cares. And then the program becomes unworkable. People often ask, is it difficult managing younger people versus people your own age because the contrast in class of values? The answer is, my favorite quote, Clark Kerr was the president of the University of California during the 60s. He said, the worst thing about being a university president is you have to take each generation of students' problems seriously. And that's the answer. Yeah, the values will be different. The problem is trying to pretend like you care about their values or care about their issues, which you will find inherently silly, frivolous, stupid, and alien. But people are people. The core of human nature is the same. Young people differ from older people in that they have different fads and different preoccupations. But the basic drivers are always exact. It's always the same old story, the fight for love and glory.